I have always believed that money was the most impenetrable shield a human being could build around himself. Over the past 4 decades, I have dedicated every drop of my sweat and every neuron in my mind to building a financial fortress that protects me from the humiliation of dependency and the chaos of poverty. I'm Eleanor, and at 72, I walk the halls of that private hospital with the unshakable certainty of someone with a net worth of over $4.5 million and a health insurance policy that cost more per month than most families earn in an entire semester. The pristine white marble floor reflected the rhythmic, authoritative sound of my 1,200 Italian heels. The air conditioning kept the temperature at a constant 21 degrees, and the smell was not of illness or death, but of lavender and expensive disinfectant, a subtle fragrance that screamed exclusivity. It was exactly 9 hours and 17 minutes on a sunny Tuesday when I entered that lobby that looked more like the reception of a 5-star hotel than an emergency medical unit. I felt slight pressure in my chest and a persistent discomfort that radiated to my left arm. Nothing sharp enough to make me fall to the floor, but worrying enough for a methodical woman like me who monitored her health as rigorously as she audited her quarterly financial statements. I went to the preferential service counter for Platinum Lifetime card holders. The receptionist was a young woman with very pale skin and hair tied into a severe bun that seemed to hug her skull. She didn't smile when I approached, which I considered a failure in the hospitality training this hospital charged so much for. I removed my ID and my magnetic insurance card from inside my ostrich leather bag and placed them on the tempered glass counter with the smoothness of someone who is used to being served before even ordering. "Good morning," I said, my voice firm despite the latent pain in my chest. "I would like to see Dr. Stevens immediately. I'm experiencing a mild arrhythmia, and I prefer to err on the side of caution." The girl took the documents without making eye contact. His long, slender fingers typed my registration number on the silent keypad. I tapped my manicured nails on the counter, awaiting the familiar beep of approval that would grant me entry to the private exam suite. However, the sound that echoed was a low, dissonant hum, an error warning that made the young woman frown. She tried again. He typed the sequence of numbers with more force, as if the pressure of his fingers could alter the digital reality that appeared on his screen. The same sound of denial filled the awkward silence between us. "Madam," she began to say with a trembling voice, avoiding looking into my eyes, "the system is not recognizing your coverage. The card appears as inactive." I let out a short, dry laugh, an automatic reaction of disbelief. That was ridiculous. It was more than ridiculous. It was mathematically impossible. My monthly payments of $4,500 were automatically debited from my main account on the 5th of each month, and I was absolutely certain that there was enough balance to cover that expense for the next 200 years if I lived that long. "My dear," I said, leaning slightly forward and lowering my voice so as not to attract the attention of the other patients in the waiting room, "you must be making a typing error. This insurance has been active for 30 years. The coverage limit for emergencies is unlimited. Please call the supervisor or try swiping the card on the manual machine. I'm in pain, and I don't have time for failures in your information technology system." She swallowed hard. I saw the gland in his neck rise and fall. She slowly turned the monitor toward me, and what I saw on that high-resolution screen made the blood run cold in my veins, paralyzing the flow of life much faster than any heart disease could. There was a flashing red stripe at the top of my electronic health record. The letters were white and brutal against the crimson background. Insured status canceled. Reason death confirmed. Date of death, 72 hours ago. When I saw the word death next to my name, I felt my heart stop for seconds. I was still breathing, but there at that moment, it was like dying while alive. I was a woman erased by the system, a living body that had already been buried on a canvas. The world around me began to spin in slow motion. The sound of phones ringing in the distance seemed to be coming from underwater. My vision blurred at the edges, just focusing on that damn word, death. How could I be dead if I could smell the coffee coming from the machine in the corner of the room? As could I be dead if the pain in my chest now became a sharp stab of real, visceral panic? "This is absurd," I shouted, and my voice came out higher than I intended, attracting the curious looks of a couple sitting on the beige leather sofa. "I'm here in front of you. I'm alive. Touch me. Feel my pulse." The receptionist moved back in her chair, pushing herself back with her feet, startled by my sudden outburst. She pressed a red button under the counter, and I knew exactly what that button meant. Security. I was being treated as a threat. I, the woman who donated $200,000 to the pediatric ward of that same hospital 5 years ago, was being treated like a raving lunatic. "Madam, please calm down," she said, in a trembling but professional voice, raising her hands as if trying to tame a wild animal. "The system is interconnected with the National Civil Registry. If the death appears here, it is because an official death certificate was issued. The security protocol blocks any use of the insurance to prevent identity fraud. The system says you're not Eleanor. The system says that Eleanor died at home of cardiac arrest last Saturday." Saturday? Last Saturday, I was on a meditation retreat in the mountains, isolated from the world, with no phone signal, seeking inner peace. I was more alive on Saturday than I have been in the last decade. The irony of the situation was so bitter that I felt the taste of bile in my mouth. Someone had killed me while I was trying to reconnect with life. "Look at my face," I demanded, slamming my hand on the glass counter. The impact made the papers shake. "I'm Eleanor. I have scars from the appendix surgery I had here in 1985. Call Dr. Stevens. He has known me for 20 years. He will confirm that I am me." "I'm sorry, ma'am, but Dr. Stevens isn't in the building today," she said. And now I saw two tall, robust figures approaching in my peripheral vision. They were the security guards. Large men in dark blue uniforms with heavy utility belts that made creaking leather sounds as they walked. They didn't look at me like I was a respectable lady. They looked at me as if I were a problem to be removed, a stain on the immaculate reception carpet. "Ma'am, we're going to have to ask you to leave," said the biggest of them, a man with a scar on his eyebrow, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. His touch was like an electric shock. No one had touched me without permission in years. Indignation burned inside me, momentarily overcoming fear. "Get your hands off me!" I hissed, shaking my shoulder to free myself from his grip. "I own half the commercial properties on this avenue. I'm going to sue this hospital and buy this building just to fire every single one of you." But my threats that would normally make bank managers tremble sounded hollow and hysterical. To them, I wasn't a real estate tycoon. I was a fraud, a confused or malicious old lady trying to use a dead woman's health insurance. The security guard was not intimidated. He held my arm more firmly now, using real physical strength. I felt my old bones protest under the pressure of his fingers. "Come on, lady. No scandal. Don't make us call the police for attempted fraud." Fraud? The word hit me like a slap in the face. I was being accused of trying to steal my own identity. They dragged me. It was not a dignified walk. My feet tripped over my own expensive heels as they forcibly guided me toward the automatic glass doors. People in the waiting room watched everything with a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. I saw a woman whispering to her husband and pointing at me. I felt shame creep up my hot, suffocating neck. I had always valued discretion over elegance, and now I was being expelled like a common criminal. As we crossed the exit door, the hot, humid air of the city hit me hard, contrasting violently with the artificial and controlled climate of the hospital. The noise of traffic, horns, and distant sirens all seemed too loud, too aggressive. The security guard let me go as soon as my feet hit the gray concrete sidewalk. "Don't come back here unless you have valid documents and a private form of payment," he said, before turning his back and returning to the cool air conditioning, leaving me there exposed and vulnerable. I stood on the sidewalk watching my reflection in the mirrored glass of the hospital facade. The woman staring back at me looked the same as always. The same impeccably cut gray hair, the same cream linen suit that cost $3,000, the same proud posture. But something had fundamentally changed in her eyes. There was a deep, primal terror there. I opened my bag with shaking hands and took out my phone cellular. I needed to call the bank. I needed to call my son, Lucas. I needed to understand what a colossal bureaucratic error had occurred. I dialed the number of my private account manager. The call didn't even go through. An automatic and impersonal recorded message stated number blocked or non-existent. I tried to access the bank app. The login screen appeared, but when I entered my biometric password, the application crashed and displayed a message account in the process of inventory. Access suspended. The ground seemed to disappear beneath my feet. Inventory? Probate is what happens when someone dies and the assets are frozen for division among the heirs. But I wasn't dead. I punched my own leg hard in physical pain to make sure it wasn't a nightmare. The pain was real. The sun burning my skin was real. It was then that realization began to seep into my mind, not like a wave, but like a slow, corrosive poison. For there to be a death certificate, someone needed to have identified the body. Someone needed to have gone to a registry office with documents and declared my death. This was not a computer error. Computers do not spontaneously invent deaths with details of cause and time. This was human. This was intentional. My hand ran to my neck for the pearl necklace my late husband had given me for our 30th anniversary. It was my lucky charm. But not even pearls could comfort me now. I was in the middle of one of the busiest avenues in the metropolis, surrounded by millions of people, but I was absolutely alone. No access to my accounts, no health insurance while my chest continued to hurt. And legally, I no longer existed. I was a ghost with a useless credit card in my hand. I thought of Lucas, my only son. He would be devastated when he found out about this mistake. Or did he already know? Cruel, icy doubt whispered in my ear. Lucas was always weak to influence, but he loved me, didn't he? And Camilla, my daughter-in-law, with her smile with perfect teeth and eyes that calculated the price of everything I wore. The image of them at dinner last week came to mind. They were eager to ask about the will and the structure of the investment funds. I thought it was just morbid curiosity, but now, severe dizziness forced me to lean against the stone wall of the hospital. I needed water. I needed to sit down. But if I walked into any establishment now and tried to buy a bottle of water, my card would be declined. I had maybe $200 in cash in my wallet. They were the only notes that separated me from total destitution. $200 for a woman who yesterday was worth $4 million. The mathematics of despair began to run in my head. How much does a taxi cost? How much does a lawyer cost? How much does it cost to prove you're alive when the whole world has decided you're dead? I looked at the cars passing by. People living their normal lives, paying their bills, existing in the systems. I envied the simplicity of the man's life, selling newspapers on the corner. He existed. I am not. I had been deleted. And as the pain in my chest pulsed in sync with my growing fear, I knew I needed to get out of there. I needed to go to the registry office. I needed to see that document with my own eyes. I needed to see who had signed my death warrant. But before taking the first step, I felt a hot and lonely tear run down my face, ruining the perfect makeup. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of fury. And I promised myself there on that hot sidewalk that if I had to come back from hell to get my life back, I would come back burning everything. If you have ever felt the injustice of being betrayed by those you trusted most, or if you fear the day when the system can simply erase everything you have built, click the sign up button now. The truth about who signed that paper will make your stomach turn, and you won't want to miss the next step in this impossible battle. Comment below. What would you do if you found out today that you were declared dead? Your answer may be scarier than you imagine. As the deafening noise of the city continued to assault me on that dirty sidewalk, my mind traveled back in time seeking refuge in the only reality I knew until 72 hours ago. The reality where I was not an invisible pauper, but rather the unquestionable matriarch of a real estate empire valued at exactly $4,500,000. It's impossible to describe the pain of losing everything if you don't understand the magnitude of what I owned and the excruciating cost of every penny accumulated. My life wasn't made up of luck. It was made of cold calculation and ruthless execution. I vividly remember my morning routine in my Victorian mansion, a fortress of red brick and sash windows, the one I had restored with an investment of $800,000 over 5 years. My mornings began in my private office, a dark oak-paneled room that smelled of old furniture wax and ambition. Sitting there in my Italian leather armchair that molded perfectly to my tired back, I reviewed the numbers. I loved numbers because, unlike people, they never lied. I knew exactly how much it cost to maintain my privileged existence. The maintenance of that house with its 3 floors and winter garden consumed $12,000 every month. Gardeners, cleaners, private security, taxes, and the central heating that I kept on even in autumn because my old bones felt the cold more intensely. I paid each bill with the satisfaction of someone signing up for their own freedom. I have been a widow for 10 years. When my husband Robert died, he left a medium-sized company and some debts, but I was the one who turned it into a money-generating machine. I learned how to negotiate with dishonest contractors, read between the lines of complex bank contracts, and evict tenants who didn't pay. I hardened my heart to fill my coffers. I did this thinking I was securing my future and the future of my only son, Lucas. Oh, Lucas. The mere mention of his name in my thoughts made my stomach churn with a toxic mix of motherly love and deep disappointment. Lucas was a 45-year-old man who still lived like a starstruck teenager. He looked like his tall father with an easy smile, but hadn't inherited an ounce of our work ethic. He and his wife Camilla lived in a comfortable house that I bought in an upscale neighborhood, but which was legally in my name. I paid them a generous allowance of $5,000 a month. For most people, $5,000 tax-free and living expenses would be a dream. For Lucas and Camilla, it was an insult. They were perpetually dissatisfied, orbiting around my fortune like vultures waiting for the carcass to cool. I remember the last dinner we had together the week before my supposed death. The mahogany dining table was set with my French china dinnerware and solid silver cutlery that needed to be hand-polished every fortnight. Camilla was sitting to my right, wearing a silk dress that I knew cost $800 because I'd seen the statement on the supplemental credit card I foolishly entrusted to them years ago. She drank my favorite wine, a Bordeaux vintage of 2010, $250 a bottle, as if it were tap water. The sound of the crystal hitting lightly against her gel nails irritated me deeply. Lucas seemed nervous that night. He was sweating lightly on his forehead, despite the air-conditioned environment. He cut the filet mignon with excessive force, causing the plate to vibrate. I knew the order would come. He always came. They never invited me to dinner or came to visit just for my company. There was always a financial prologue. Mother, began Lucas, wiping his mouth with the starched linen napkin. We were thinking, the investment market is very volatile right now, don't you think? Maybe it was time for you to diversify. Pass some assets into my name, for tax reasons, of course. I calmly set down my cutlery and faced him. The audacity was palpable. Tax issues, I repeated in a tone of voice that would make a bank manager tremble. Lucas, you can barely manage the household budget of $5,000 that I give you. Last month, you asked me for an advance of $2,000 to repair the imported car you insisted on buying. How do you intend to manage a portfolio of $4.5 million? Camilla intervened with that sickly, sweet voice she used to manipulate. Oh, Eleanor, don't be so harsh. Lucas just wants to help. We are worried about you. Managing all of this alone at that age must be tiring, and we have plans. We want to invest in our own business, a unique opportunity. I knew what a unique opportunity was. Another get-rich-quick scheme, another bet disguised as entrepreneurship. They had already lost $50,000 on a frozen yogurt franchise 2 years ago. Money I never saw coming back. I'm not going to pass anything on to your name, I said, taking a sip of my wine and feeling the tannic flavor wash my mouth. The money is safe in fixed income funds and real estate. And as for tiredness, I am perfectly lucid and capable. As long as I live, I control the money. The day I die, the will take care of you. But until then, you will have to learn to live with the $5,000. The silence that followed was heavy and icy. I saw the look of hatred that Camilla gave Lucas, a look that said, "Do something, you useless person." Lucas turned red with contained anger. "Mom, $5,000 is worth nothing. Nowadays," he replied with a changed voice, "we have status to maintain. Our friends travel to Europe twice a year. We look like beggars compared to them. You're sitting on a gold mine and giving us crumbs. It's selfishness." Selfishness? I laughed, a humorless laugh. Selfishness is a 72-year-old woman working until midnight reviewing rental contracts so that her 45-year-old son can play tennis at the club on Tuesday afternoon. I built this fortress brick by brick, Lucas. I sacrificed vacations, I sacrificed sleep, and I often sacrificed time with you as a child to make sure we never went hungry. And now you call me selfish because you can't buy a boat? The argument ended with them leaving, slamming the door, leaving dinner half finished. I was alone at that huge table, surrounded by the luxury I had achieved, but feeling a terrible emptiness in my chest. That night, I went to my master bedroom, locked the double doors, and looked at the safe hidden behind an oil painting. Inside were the deeds, bearer bonds, and my most valuable jewelry, a set of diamonds and sapphires valued at $150,000 that I intended to wear to my granddaughter's wedding if Lucas ever deigned to give me one. I felt safe in that house. The walls were thick, the alarm system was state-of-the-art, and monitored 24 hours a day. I paid $300 a month just for remote monitoring. I thought the danger would come from outside, from a masked thief in a market in crisis to an unstable government. Never in my worst nightmares did I imagine that danger was sitting at my table, eating my food and drinking my wine. Now standing in the hot and noisy street without a penny in his pocket. That memory of dinner seemed like a prophecy. Their insistence on passing the assets into Lucas's name, the anger in Camilla's eyes, the mention that I should rest. They didn't want to wait for nature to take its course. I was very healthy, very stubborn, and very controlling. For them, I was a biological obstacle between them and the 4.5 million. I could see the joint bank account that I monitored to pay their allowance. It was always in the red or close to zero. They must have been desperate. Maybe gambling debts? Lucas had a penchant for online sports betting that I turned a blind eye to. Or maybe loan sharks. Financial despair makes people do crazy things. But killing your own mother? Or worse, kill her bureaucratically and leave her alive but with no civil life? The midday sun beat down on my face, and I felt the bitter irony of my situation. I had spent my life accumulating wealth for control and security, and it was precisely this wealth that put a target on my back. If I were a retiree living on a minimum government pension, Lucas and Camilla wouldn't even bother to falsify a death certificate. No one kills a hen that doesn't lay golden eggs. My mind went back to the financial details. My investments had immediate liquidity in case of death. There was life insurance. There were joint accounts that would be automatically unlocked with the death certificate. My God, the speed. If I had been dead for 72 hours, they already had access to everything. The emergency fund of 300,000. The actions. They could be liquidating everything right this second. I felt violent nausea. It wasn't just about the money. It was because of disrespect. It was for the violation of everything I stood for. I was Eleanor, the woman who negotiated with real estate sharks, and now I was being devoured by sardines that I fed myself. The image of Camilla laughing at that dinner table superimposed on the image of the hospital receptionist, saying death gave me a frightening clarity. They didn't do it on impulse. This was planned. The meditation retreat where I was left without a cell phone. It was the perfect window of opportunity. I needed to act. But how do you act when every step costs money and you don't have any? How to fight when your gold armor has been melted. I looked down at my Italian shoes now covered in a fine layer of street dust. They were worth $1,200 new. Maybe at a high-end thrift store, I could get $200 for them. It was humiliating, it was degrading, but it was the beginning of a war plan. Because if Lucas and Camilla thought they could inherit my empire without a fight, they were about to find out that old Eleanor still had claws, even after she was dead. If the greed of a son capable of erasing his own mother for money revolts you, you need to see what I'm going to discover next. Subscribe to the channel now, because in the next chapter, I'm going to go into the lion's den to get proof of the crime, and I guarantee that what I'm going to find will make your blood boil more than mine. Leave your like if you think that early inheritance is theft, and comment. The money reveals character or corrupts it? I want to read your opinion. I clutched my leather bag to my chest so tightly that I felt the golden metal buckle dig into my skin through the thin fabric of my blouse. The midday sun punished the asphalt, and the heat rose in visible waves, distorting the urban landscape around me. But I felt a sepulchral cold that seemed to emanate from within my own bones. I stopped the first taxi I saw, a worn-out yellow vehicle with the backseat upholstery smelling of old cigarettes and cheap lemon disinfectant. The driver, a burly man who was chewing on a toothpick, looked at me in the rearview mirror with disdain, perhaps judging my scruffy appearance or the manic urgency in my eyes. I ordered to the civil registration department, trying to recover the authority that has always been my trademark, and fast. I'll pay double if we arrive in less than 20 minutes. The driver grunted his agreement and accelerated, throwing me against the grimy backrest. As the city passed by like a gray blur through the dirty window, I opened my wallet and counted the bills with trembling fingers. 185 in cash. It was all that was left of my empire. Yesterday, I could have bought that taxi company's entire fleet with a digital subscription. Today, I was calculating whether I would have enough to pay for the race and even bribe some underpaid public official to let me see the document that ended my existence. The mathematics of poverty is cruel and exhausting. It occupies every inch of your brain with survival subtractions, and I have never been so terrified of a subtraction math in my life. The civil registry building was a brutalist construction of gray concrete stained by pollution. A fortress of bureaucracy that seemed designed to suck the hope out of anyone who walked through its revolving doors. The lobby was packed. There were hundreds of people holding crumpled paper passwords, children crying, the constant hum of muffled conversations, and the irritating mechanical sound of dot matrix printers spitting out documents. The air inside was heavy and charged with the smell of sweat and anxiety. I looked at the electronic panel on the wall. Current password 112. The last password retrieved from the machine was 405. If I waited in line like a regular citizen, I would only be served later in the afternoon. And I didn't have time. Time was a luxury that Lucas and Camilla had stolen from me along with my money. I walked directly to the service counters, ignoring the disapproving looks from the people sitting on the hard plastic chairs. My eyes scanned the employees behind the armored glass for the weakest link. I needed someone who looked tired, someone who looked like life had been unfair, someone for whom $100 in cash would make the difference between a decent dinner and a cold sandwich. I found my target at window 7. A middle-aged man with deep circles under his eyes, a loose tie around his neck, and a coffee stain on his cheap polyester shirt. He typed slowly with an expression of deadly boredom. I approached the glass and placed my hand on the cold marble counter, discreetly covering the $100 bill that I had folded into quarters. The man looked up irritably, ready to point at the password machine. "Ma'am, the line is back there," he said in the slurred voice of someone who repeats the same phrase 1,000 times a day. "I'm not a lady who waits in line," I said, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial whisper and slowly sliding the $100 under the glass. "I'm a desperate mother who needs a simple administrative favor. Nobody needs to know. Just 5 minutes of your attention, and this is yours." His eyes fell to the green note with the portrait of the dead president. He hesitated. He looked around to see if the supervisor was nearby. Greed and need briefly fought with fear on his sagging face, but need won. He quickly covered the note with paperwork and made a subtle nod. "What do you want?" he asked without moving his lips, almost like a ventriloquist. "I need a copy of Eleanor Vance's death certificate," I replied, feeling a metallic taste in my mouth as I pronounced my own name, followed by those ominous words. He typed the name on the greasy keyboard. The sound of the keys sounded like gunshots in my ear. "This is confidential for immediate family members," he said, frowning as he read the screen. "The registration is recent. Very recent. I'm her twin sister," I lied without blinking. "I was traveling and only found out now. I need to see the cause. I need to see who was with her. Please." He sighed and clicked on the printer icon. The hum of the machine filled the tense silence between us. Seconds later, he pulled out a sheet of letterhead that was still warm and slid it off, eyed it for me under the glass. "Here it is, but I can't authenticate without the original documents. It is for viewing only." I pulled at the paper as if it were made of fragile glass. My hands were shaking so much that the letters seemed to dance on the page. I took a deep breath and forced my vision to focus. There it was, the official document, the certificate of my extinction. Name of the late Eleanor Vance. Date of death, 21st November, last Saturday. Time, 16 hours and 15 minutes. Saturday at 4:15 in the afternoon. At that exact moment, I was sitting in the lotus position on a wooden deck, looking at a mirrored lake 200 kilometers from the city. I was breathing the pure mountain air, while here in this concrete jungle, my son signed the end of my life. My eyes dropped to the cause of death field. Cardiorespiratory arrest. Acute myocardial infarction. Place of death, home of the deceased. They said I died at home, in my own bed. The audacity of the lie was so great that it was elegant in its perversity. A natural death. No violence, no police. Just an old lady whose heart stopped beating. Who would question? Who would perform an autopsy on a 72-year-old woman with a history of mild hypertension if the family did not request it? I continued reading, looking for the name of the doctor who confirmed this hoax. Responsible physician, Dr. Silas V.M. CRM, 45892. I had never heard of that name. My cardiologist was Dr. Stevens. This doctor, Silas, must have been some corrupt doctor in debt, or perhaps someone who lost his license and was selling subscriptions on the black market to dishonest funeral homes. Lucas must have paid a fortune for that signature, probably using my own money, the money he stole from the joint accounts. And then I reached the final field, the field that made my legs give out and forced me to hold on to the edge of the balcony to avoid collapsing on the dirty floor. Death declaration, Lucas Vance. Degree of kinship child. His signature was there, the same signature with excessive flourishes that I taught him to do when he took out his first bank account at 18. The digitized black ink seemed to scream off the page. He was here. He looked into the eyes of a public servant, handed over my documents, and said with a voice choked with false sadness, "My mother is gone." And just below was an observation marked with an X in a small box. Disposal of the body, immediate cremation. Waiver of wake, cremation. It is clear. How do you hide a body that doesn't exist? You say he turned to ashes. You say the pain was too great for a public wake. You get rid of the physical evidence of the crime by turning it into imaginary dust. They didn't need to bury an empty coffin. They just needed a piece of paper saying the ashes were given to the family. Lucas turned me into administrative dust. "Madam, are you okay?" asked the counter employee, his voice seeming to come from far away. "The lady is very pale." I didn't respond. I couldn't speak. The anger I felt couldn't be put into words. It was a biblical rage. Lucas didn't just steal my money, he stole my story. He decided I was no longer worth being alive. To him, I was just an obstacle between him and his bank balance. He killed me on Saturday afternoon, probably after a light lunch and before going to play tennis. The paper in my hand seemed to burn. That was proof of the crime, material proof of treason. But it was also proof of my impotence. For the legal world represented by that official stamp, I no longer existed. I was a statistical error standing there breathing. I folded the paper with almost reverent care and put it in my bag. That piece of paper was worth more than the diamonds I had in my safe. That paper was my death sentence, but it would be their prison sentence. "Thank you," I said hoarsely. I left the building staggering like I was drunk. The sunlight outside felt offensive. People walked past me laughing, talking on their cell phones, eating snacks, oblivious to the fact that a woman had just discovered that she was murdered by her own son. I needed to see with my own eyes the house where my body supposedly came from. I needed to see if they had changed things yet, if they were already living the life of millionaire heirs over my non-existent corpse. I looked at the money left in my wallet, $85. It wasn't much, but it was enough to take me to the upscale neighborhood where my mansion was located. I was going home, not to get in because I knew my keys wouldn't work, but to look into the eyes of the beast, to see the extent of the withdrawal. I stopped on the sidewalk and took a deep breath of the city's polluted air. The smell of gasoline and hot asphalt has never seemed so real to me. I was alive, damn VVAT. And as long as my heart beat, driven by the pure and crystalline hatred that now coursed through my veins, I would be the worst nightmare that Lucas and Camilla could imagine. They thought they had gotten rid of the old controlling company. Little did they know that they had just unleashed something much worse. If you think a stranger's betrayal hurts, wait until you see what your own family is capable of doing as an inheritance. What I will find in my house will leave you floored in the same way it left me. Subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications, because in the next chapter I will be expelled from my own sanctuary, and the humiliation will be so deep that you will feel it in your own skin. Leave your comment. Would you forgive a son who declared his death for money? I want to know your limit. The yellow taxi stopped smoothly in front of number 742 Avenida das Acacias, and the silence of that rich suburb fell over me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. I paid the driver with the last crumpled bills I had, with just a few metal coins remaining at the bottom of my ostrich leather bag. When the car drove away, leaving a trail of gray smoke that soon dissipated into the pure, jasmine-scented air of my garden, I stood there on the sidewalk, looking at my house. My red brick Victorian mansion, valued at $4.5 million, seemed more imposing and unattainable than ever. The afternoon sun beat down on the newly restored sash windows, making the glass shine as if the house was wearing jewelry. I knew every inch of that building. I knew that the gutter on the north side needed cleaning every 3 months, and that the porch step had a slight, unnoticeable slope to drain rainwater. That house was my skin, my armor against the world, and now I was on the outside looking at it like a stranger. I walked along the Portuguese stone path that led to the main door, feeling my $1,200 Italian heels click with each step. The sound echoed dry and lonely. My heart beat in an unsteady rhythm, a mixture of foolish hope and absolute dread. Maybe it was all a terrible mistake. Maybe I would type my password into the electronic lock and the door would open with that soft, familiar click, and I would find Lucas sitting on the couch, worried about my disappearance. I raised a trembling hand toward the digital panel of the state-of-the-art lock that I had installed 6 months ago for security reasons. The irony was palpable. The security system that was supposed to protect me from intruders now treated me like a threat. I entered the code, 1952 hashtag, the year of my birth. The panel emitted a low-pitched sound, and a red light flashed violently. Access denied. I tried again. My fingers were slipping with sweat. 1952 hashtag. Access denied. Invalid code. Wait 3 minutes for another attempt. They changed the password. Lucas and Camilla wasted no time. In less than 72 hours, they reconfigured the system that controlled access to the sanctuary that took me 40 years to build. I felt a wave of nausea rise up my throat. I wasn't just a dead woman on paper. I was a woman banished from physical existence itself. I forced the solid bronze handle, knowing it was useless, but desperation does not follow logic. The door was locked solidly motionless, indifferent to my anguish. I punched the varnished wood once, twice, until I felt the sharp pain in my knuckles, but the house remained silent. I walked around the property, stepping on the perfectly trimmed grass that cost me $400 a week in gardening. I went to the French doors of the living room that led to the back garden, hoping to find a gap in a forgotten window open. What I found was much worse than a locked door. Through the double soundproof glass, I saw the inside of my room. The air conditioning must have been on full blast as the linen curtains were swaying slightly. And there she was, Camilla. My daughter-in-law had a vintage Danish design piece that I paid $18,000 for at auction, lying on my favorite armchair. She wore a silk robe, my silk robe, the one I bought in Paris and kept for special occasions. She was barefoot, with her feet brazenly resting on the glass coffee table, which I always strictly prohibited. In her right hand she held a baccarat crystal glass, filled to the brim with a thick, dark red liquid. I recognized the bottle on the table immediately. It was a Petrus from 1998, a bottle that was worth around $5,000 on the current market. I would save it for my 75th birthday, or the day my grandson was born if that happened. Camilla was drinking that as if it were cheap grape juice. She was on the phone laughing. I couldn't hear the sound through the bulletproof glass, but her body language was unmistakable. She threw her head back in triumphant laughter. She looked like the queen of the castle, a relaxed and victorious usurper celebrating the conquest of the spoils. I pressed my face to the glass, feeling the cold of the surface against my sweaty forehead. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pick up a rock from the garden and shatter that window, invade the room and rip that robe off her body. But a cold, rational voice in the back of my mind stopped me. If I did that, the silent alarm would go off. The police would come, and what would they find? An old, undocumented lady listed as dead in the system, trespassing on the property of a grieving couple. They would take me to prison or worse, admit me to a psychiatric hospital as an unknown indigent. I had no identity. I had no rights. I was a ghost watching my own life being consumed by parasites. I turned away from the window, feeling the hot tears of helplessness running down my face, smearing the expensive mascara. I had to get out of there. I had to flee my own home before I was seen and humiliated even more. I walked back to the street, my feet hurting unbearably in my heels. The sun began to set, turning the sky a bloody orange, and with the night came the cold and the brutal reality of my financial situation. I had exactly $12.50 in my purse. There were no credit cards. There was no checkbook. My banking apps were blocked. I tried to get into a boutique hotel near a place where I had already had afternoon tea with friends. The receptionist smiled when I walked in, recognizing my designer clothes, but the smile disappeared when I asked for a room and said I would pay in cash later. "We need a credit card for the deposit, ma'am, and a valid ID," she said in that polite but inflexible tone. "I don't have with me now," I lied, trying to maintain my dignity. "So we can't host her. I am really sorry." I was kicked out of 3 hotels. With each refusal, I felt physically diminished. My proud matriarch posture was bowing. Hunger began to gnaw at my stomach, a physical pain I hadn't felt in decades. I bought a bottle of water and a pack of cookies at a convenience store using half of my remaining equity. I sat on a park bench as night fell and the temperature dropped to 12 degrees. I was shaking not just from the cold, but from shock. It was then that reality hit me. I had nowhere to go. My friends? How would I explain? "Hi, I'm dead. My son stole from me. Can I sleep on your couch?" They would call Lucas. The morning sun rose gray and indifferent, filtered by the pollution that hung over the city like a dirty shroud. I woke up with my body screaming in pain in every joint. My 72 spring bones were not made for sleeping, curled up on a hard wooden bench in a subway station. The digital clock on the station wall showed exactly 6 hours and 14 minutes. The smell around me was a sickening mixture of dried urine, cheap industrial disinfectant, and the metallic odor of the tracks. Eleanor, the woman who slept on 800 thread-count Egyptian cotton sheets, spent the night hugging my Chanel bag as if it were a life jacket in the middle of the ocean. I got up feeling humiliation run down my spine like ice water. My cream linen suit was wrinkled and stained with soot. My once impeccable hair was now a tangle of greasy gray strands. I walked to the station's public bathroom. The mirror was cracked and dirty, but the reflection it gave back was the hardest blow. I looked crazy. One of those invisible women I used to ignore as I hurried past in my chauffeur-driven sedan. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to wash away not just the dirt, but the nightmare. But the water did not wash away reality. I was still dead. I was still penniless, and I had a mission. The Central District Police Station was 12 blocks away. I made the journey on foot, dragging my high heels that now hurt my swollen feet like instruments of medieval torture. I arrived at reception at 8:05. The place smelled of burnt coffee and stagnant bureaucracy. There were lines of people with tired looks, but I didn't have time to queue. I marched up to the main desk where a young officer with the name Sergeant Miller engraved on his metal chest plate was typing slowly on an old computer. "I want to report a crime," I said in the firmest voice I could muster, trying to project the authority I always had in corporate boardrooms. I was a victim of identity fraud and fraud LSification of public documents. "The culprit is my son, Lucas Vance." The sergeant didn't even look up. He continued typing. "Fill out form B12 at the table next to you, ma'am. I'm not going to fill out any form." I slammed my hand on the counter, and the dry sound made him finally look at me. His expression was one of absolute boredom. I was declared dead. "My son forged my death certificate 4 days ago. He's selling my $4.5 million house right now. I'm alive. I'm here in front of you." The sergeant sighed and turned his chair. He looked me up and down, judging my wrinkled clothes and my makeup-free face. "Name? Eleanor Vance," he typed. The clicking of the keys felt like they were hammering into my head. He frowned. Then he typed something else. "Madam, the system here says that Eleanor Vance passed away on the 21st. Case closed administratively. If you're saying it's her, that's a problem. But if the system says she's dead, I can't file a complaint on behalf of a dead person. Do you have an ID?" I handed over my ID. He looked at the photo taken 5 years ago when I was tanned and happy after a summer in Tuscany, and then looked at the broken woman in front of him. It seems the lady admitted he returned the card. "But the document is canceled in the federal system. Look, ma'am, this is not a police case. This is a civil matter. If there was an error at the registry office or at the hospital, you have to go there and resolve it. The police deal with crimes. Robbery, murder, assault. Paperwork errors are with lawyers." "Paperwork error?" My voice went up an octave. "This is theft. He stole my life. He stole my bank accounts. This is a premeditated crime." Sergeant Miller crossed his arms. His body language was clear. I was a nuisance. "Madam, without proof of a crime, I can't do anything. A death certificate is an official document. If a doctor signed it, it is valid until a judge says otherwise. I'm not a judge. I'm a sergeant. If you continue shouting here, I'm going to have to arrest you for public nuisance. And since you don't have a technically valid ID, you would be prosecuted as an unknown indigent. Do you want to spend the day in the cell with the inmates from last night?" I swallowed the bitter taste of hate. The threat was real. He would arrest me. The system in which I paid taxes my entire life, taxes that totaled more than $50,000 a year in income alone, now threatened to throw me in a cage because I dared to claim that I was alive. I left the police station shaking with anger. The sun was already up and the heat was increasing. My next stop was the Central Bank of the Metropolis. I had an account at that agency for 35 years. The manager, Mr. Henderson, knew my grandchildren by photo. He would know. He would help me. He would see the truth. The bank's facade was imposing with marble columns and revolving armored glass doors. I walked in feeling the cold air conditioning dry the sweat on the back of my neck. The security guard at the door barred my entry. "Document, please." "I'm a private customer," I said, trying to maintain my posture. "Mr. Henderson knows me." The security guard hesitated, but my clothes, despite being wrinkled, were still designer, and my bag was still an authentic Chanel. He let me pass with a suspicious look. I walked straight to the VIP area on the second floor. The frosted glass doors opened, and I saw Mr. Henderson sitting at his mahogany desk. He was on the phone laughing. When he saw me, the color drained from his face instantly. He hung up the phone and stood up, not to greet me, but as if he had seen a haunting. "Eleanor?" he whispered. "But we received the official notification. The inventory was opened on Monday," David said, using his first name to force intimacy. "David, you see me. I didn't die. It was a blow from Lucas. Please, I need you to unfreeze my accounts. I need money to hire a lawyer. I have $2,100,000 in liquidity in this account. It's my money." He stepped back around the table to get away from me. He didn't seem relieved to see me alive. He seemed terrified of the legal implications. Eleanor, Mrs. Vance, I can't. The death protocol is irreversible at the agency. Your assets are under the guardianship of the estate. Inventory locks everything. Only the executor can move funds for funeral expenses or estate debts. The inventor is Lucas, I shouted, losing my composure. Are you going to let the thief spend my money while I starve on the street? David, I gave you a $5,000 watch last Christmas. Mrs. Vance, please tone it down, he asked, looking at the other glass rooms where other rich clients were watching us. The bank follows strict rules. If I release a penny to a person whose CPF is listed as canceled, I will lose my job and be prosecuted for fraud banking. The system does not even allow me to access your account. The screen is gray. Judicial blockade. But I'm here. I'll sign anything. I do notarization. It's no use. You legally do not have civil capacity at this time. You need a court order reversing the death. Until then, you're at the bank. Well, you don't exist. He pressed a button on the table. Seconds later, 2 armed security guards entered the room. I'm sorry, Mrs. Vance. Please accompany the lady to the exit. I was escorted, once again. This time not from a hospital, but from the place where I kept the fruits of 40 years of work. As I walked through the lobby, I saw the tellers counting wads of cash. I saw people withdrawing notes. That money was paper, but it had more power than me. I was thrown onto the hot sidewalk again. The midday sun was relentless. I sat on the curb, no longer caring about the dirt on my suit. Hunger was a painful cramp in my stomach. Thirst left my mouth as dry as sandpaper. I had tried the right way. Police, bank, the institutions that support civilized society, and they all failed me. They all preferred to believe a piece of paper printed by a corrupt bureaucrat than the flesh and blood woman screaming in front of them. As I sat there defeated, a luxury car stopped at a red light. It was a silver convertible. I looked, and my heart stopped. It was my car, my $120,000 Mercedes convertible, and driving was Camilla. She wore oversized sunglasses and a silk scarf in her hair in a Grace Kelly style. She laughed, talking on her cell phone via Bluetooth. I got up with a suicidal impulse and ran towards the car, screaming, "You thief! Camilla, get out of my car!" She saw me. For a second, I saw the shock in her eyes behind the dark lenses. The smile disappeared, but she didn't stop. The signal changed. She stepped on the gas. The V8 engine roared and the car took off, almost passing over my feet. I felt the movement of hot air and the smell of burning tires. She ran away. She saw me alive, dirty and screaming, and sped up. I fell to my knees on the hot asphalt, crying with anger and frustration. People were honking. Someone shouted, "Get off the crazy old street, crazy old woman." That's what I had become. In 4 days, I went from the top of the social pyramid to the gutter. I had no more tears. Police said he was a civilian. The bank said it was legal. And my family tried to run me over. I understood at that moment. There would be no justice from men in suits or officers in uniform. The system was designed to protect the role, not the person. If I wanted my life back, I couldn't ask for permission. I would have to take it. And to do that, I needed to stop being Mrs. Eleanor Vance, the respectable widow who played by the rules. I needed to become something that Lucas and Camilla couldn't predict. I needed an ally who was as dirty as the game they were playing. I remembered a name I hadn't uttered in years because it represented everything I despised about the business world. Unscrupulous cunning. But now scrupulosity was a luxury I couldn't afford. I got up, wiped my bleeding knees, and started walking, not to the police, but to the park where the old chess players gathered, where the sharp minds that the world forgot went to kill time. Have you ever felt like you're shouting the truth to a world that refuses to listen? The pain of being ignored is worse than physical pain, and what I'm going to do now goes against all the principles I've defended my entire life. Subscribe to the channel because in the next chapter, I'm going to make a pact with the devil to recover what's mine, and believe me when I say that revenge is a dish best served cold and is very expensive. Leave a like if you think the system protects the rich and punishes the victims. I walked dragging my swollen and injured feet for more than 45 minutes until I reached the wrought iron gates of Municipal Park. The sun was already beginning to sink below the horizon, painting the sky a purple tone that in other times I would have admired from my balcony with a glass of wine in my hand, but which now only signaled the arrival of another night of cold terror in the open. My stomach twisted in painful spasms, a cruel reminder that my last decent meal had been nearly 30 hours ago. Hunger is not just a physical sensation, It is a mental humiliation. It clouds your thinking. It makes you look at leftover food in the trash with longing. And I, Eleanor, the woman who once spent $500 on a single dinner, was fighting the urge to dig through the park's trash cans. I wasn't there to enjoy nature or see the ducks in the artificial lake. I was there because I remembered an old habit of a man I knew, a man I wouldn't call a friend, far from it. Arthur Penhaligon was my biggest rival in the 90s, a retired tax lawyer known in business circles as the Velvet Shark because he destroyed you with a smile on his face and a smooth voice. We competed to buy a downtown office complex in 1998. I won the auction by a margin of only $50,000, and he never completely forgave me. But I knew that Arthur was a creature of unchanging habits. He played chess every Tuesday and Thursday in the park's outdoor club, rain or shine. The chess club was a secluded corner surrounded by centuries-old oak trees where old men gathered to exercise the only things that age had not robbed them of intellect and cunning. The smell there was a mixture of pipe tobacco, dry autumn leaves, and intense concentration. The sound was just the dry clicking of wooden pieces on the trays and the rhythmic ticking of analog clocks. I saw him immediately. Arthur was sitting at the furthest table wearing a beige cashmere coat that must have cost around $3,000, even though it was from a 10-year-old collection. He was 75 years old, but his clear blue eyes still had that predatory gleam that I knew so well. He was decimating his opponent, a man in a beret who was sweating coldly in front of the board. Arthur moved the pieces with his long, age-stained fingers with the precision of a surgeon removing a tumor. I stopped next to his table, projecting my shadow over the board. The smell of my own dirt embarrassed me, but I kept my chin up. Arthur didn't look up. He just moved the bishop by capturing an opponent's knight. "You're blocking my light," he said, in that hoarse, drawling voice that used to dominate courtrooms. "If you came to ask for alms, ma'am, the church is 3 blocks north." "Arthur," I said. My voice was weak, hoarse from thirst and emotion. "I didn't know you still used the Sicilian defense. I thought I had become more conservative with age." His hand stopped in midair. The clock ticked 3 times in the absolute silence that formed. Slowly, very slowly, he raised his face. His eyes examined me with clinical coldness, passing through my disheveled hair, my stained suit, and my ruined shoes. There was no immediate recognition, just confusion. Eleanor asked him, frowning, his white eyebrows coming together. "Eleanor Vance? It can't be. I read it in the financial newspaper this morning. The death notice was published in the social column. Cardiac arrest. The funeral was private." "I'm a ghost, Arthur," I replied, sitting heavily on the concrete bench opposite his, ignoring his opponent who was gawking at us. A dirty, hungry ghost without a penny in his pocket. But unfortunately for my son, I'm still breathing. Arthur dismissed the other player with an impatient wave of his hand, throwing a $20 bill onto the board. "Get out of here, George. The game is over. Go buy some ice cream." When we were alone, surrounded only by trees and dusk, Arthur leaned forward. He didn't look horrified. He seemed fascinated. The shine in his eyes increased. It was the look of someone who was bored with retirement and had just found an interesting puzzle. "You look horrible, Eleanor," he said, with the brutal frankness that I always hated and respected in him. "It looks like she was run over by a garbage truck. If this is a joke, it is in very bad taste. If it is a scam, it is very elaborate. Prove it's you. Anyone can see photos of Eleanor Vance on the internet and try to impersonate her. Say something only the real Eleanor would know, something that isn't in magazines." I took a deep breath, pulling an old file under lock and key from my memory. "December 1995, I said, looking straight into his eyes. "The Plaza Hotel deal. We were in the meeting room. You discovered that the seller was hiding a $2 million mortgage in a bank in the Cayman Islands. Instead of reporting it, you used this information to lower the price by 30%, and we split the difference in a phantom consultancy that never existed on paper. The company was called Consultoria Phoenix. You bought your first yacht with your share." Arthur leaned back in the seat, and a slow, crooked smile formed on his thin lips. He let out a dry laugh that sounded like leaves crunching. "My God," he whispered, shaking his head. "It's you, the old viper, Phoenix Consulting." I hadn't heard that name in 20 years. He took a silk handkerchief from his pocket and offered it to me not to wipe my face, but as a gesture of truce. "So you didn't die," he said. "No, I was bureaucratically murdered," I corrected, feeling a wave of dizziness. "Luke and his wife. They forged the certificate. They blocked me from all. Arthur, I have $4.5 million in assets and I can't buy a bottle of water. The police don't believe me. The bank kicked me out. I don't exist. Arthur took a silver cigar case from the inside pocket of his coat and lit a thin cigarillo, releasing the aromatic smoke into the cold air. He seemed to be calculating the probabilities by analyzing the scenario as if it were a complex chess game. "Lucas," he said dismissively. "That boy always had the charisma of a wilted lettuce and the intelligence of a door. I never imagined he had the stomach for something like that. Administrative matricide. It's bold." He looked at my shaking hands. "You need a lawyer, Eleanor." "I can't afford a lawyer, Arthur," I replied bitterly. "I have no identity. I don't have any money. No one accepts a case of a destitute who claims to be a dead millionaire. They think I'm crazy." Arthur inhaled his cigarette and looked at the horizon where the city lights were beginning to light up, the skyscrapers shining like unreachable golden towers. "I'm retired," he said. "I spend my days humiliating senile old men at chess and feeding pigeons. It's a miserable existence for a man who used to make governments back down in tax disputes." He turned to me, and for the first time I saw something other than curiosity. I saw solidarity. Not the mushy solidarity of pity, but that of a warrior seeing another wounded veteran on the battlefield. "I hate the system, Eleanor," he continued. "I've spent my life manipulating the system, but I hate it when it's used by stupid amateurs like your son to destroy professionals like us. It is an offense to the art of war." He reached into his coat pocket and took out a wad of bills held together by a gold clip. They were $100 bills. There must have been $2,000 there. He placed the deck on the chessboard between the white king and the black queen. "I'll take over the case," he said. I looked at the money and then at him, unable to believe it. "I can't pay you now, Arthur. My accounts are—" "I don't want your money now," he interrupted sharply. "I have enough money to live 3 more lives. What I want is fun, Eleanor. I want to see the look on your mediocre son's face when we destroy his life piece by piece. I want the satisfaction of taking this flawed system that declared you dead and making you eat your words. I want chaos." He stood up and extended his hand to me. "Let's go. My driver is waiting in the car. I have a home office that I haven't used in years, but I still have access to legal databases and contacts that the police don't even dream exist. First, let's feed you. You look like you're going to faint. Then we'll give you a bath. And tomorrow, we begin the hunt." I held his hand. The skin was dry and cold, but the grip was firm. When he helped me up, I felt a tear flow not from sadness, but from pure relief. I was no longer alone. I had an ally. And he wasn't just any ally. Arthur Penhaligon was the only man I feared in business. Now, he was on my side. We got into his car, a black armored sedan that smelled like new leather. Arthur opened a minibar in the back seat and handed me a turkey sandwich and a bottle of sparkling water. That plastic-wrapped sandwich was the best meal of my life. Every bite brought me back to life. While I was eating voraciously, Arthur took out his cell phone. "Simon? It's Arthur." "Yes, I know it's 8 at night. Wake up, Judge Miller. Tell him I'm going to call in that favor from 1999. Yes, that favor? I need a search warrant for unofficial medical records. And Simon, get a private investigator. The best. I want to bug a house." He hung up and looked at me with a wicked smile. "The war began, Eleanor, and we have the advantage that they think you're just ashes in an urn. Nobody watches the dead." I laid my head on the soft seat of the car, feeling the engine purring softly as we drove away from the park. For the first time in 4 days, I closed my eyes without fear of not waking up. I had lost my house, my money, and my identity, but I had just gotten a nuclear weapon called Arthur. Lucas and Camilla were busy spending my money thinking they had won. They didn't know that the real chess game had just started, and I had just placed my strongest piece on the board. Sometimes help comes from where we least expect it, and the enemy of my enemy is my best friend. Now that I have Arthur and his unlimited resources, we won't just defend ourselves, we will attack. If you want to see how 2 financial war veterans set up a perfect trap to catch amateur scammers, subscribe to the channel now. In the next chapter, we will invade the privacy of my killers and discover what dirty secret they are hiding. Comment below. Who would you call if you needed to hide a body or rise from the dead? The smell of aged leather and pipe tobacco filled the thick air of Arthur's private library, a cavernous room with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with legal codes and encyclopedias that hadn't been opened in decades. It was 3 hours and 12 minutes in the morning, and my eyes burned as if they had been rubbed with sand. But the adrenaline that coursed through my veins was more potent than any espresso. I was sitting in front of 3 high-resolution monitors that clashed violently with the Victorian decor of the room. The bluish glow of the screens illuminated my tired face, revealing the expression lines of a woman who had aged 10 years in 4 days. Arthur was next to me, typing frantically on a mechanical keyboard, whose rhythmic sound resembled the firing of a silent machine gun. He was no longer the retiree who fed pigeons in the park. He was back to being the predatory, frighteningly efficient velvet shark. We weren't just looking at bank statements. We were performing a financial autopsy of my life. Arthur had contacted a former associate, a digital forensics expert operating in the shadows, who in exchange for $5,000 transferred from Arthur's offshore account gave us mirrored access to my own accounts. What I saw in those Excel spreadsheets flashing on the center screen was like being punched in the stomach over and over again. "Look at this, Eleanor," Arthur said, pointing to a red line on the cash flow graph. "They're not just spending, they are liquidating. It's a controlled fire." My eyes followed his finger. On the 22nd of November, just 24 hours after the registration of my false death, there was a total redemption of my immediate liquidity fund. $350,000 evaporated in a single click. It took me 7 years to accumulate that amount by religiously depositing profits from commercial rentals. And where did the money go? My eyes tracked the next transfer. Luxury Motors dealership. $128,500. I felt bile rise in my throat. Lucas bought a car. While I slept on a park bench, shivering from the cold, my son used my security money to buy a metal and leather toy, probably that red Italian sports car that he had coveted for years and that I always said was a waste of capital. $120,000 in a depreciable liability. The stupidity hurt as much as the betrayal. And here, said Arthur, clicking on another tab, split transfers. 9,000 here, 9,000 there. All below the 10,000 limit, so as not to trigger the government's automatic money laundering alerts. They are withdrawing in cash. They are filling suitcases with your money, Eleanor. They know it's a race against time. But the coup de grace came when Arthur opened a luxury real estate website on another screen. There she was, the photo of my house. My red brick mansion is my sanctuary, but there was something wrong. The price, $3,200,000. Payment only in cash. I choked. The house was worth $4.5 million. Any mediocre appraiser would know this. They were selling it at a 30% discount. This is what we call fire sales in the market. It's what criminals do when they need to turn bricks into cash before the police arrive. They were willing to lose $1,300,000 of my equity just for speed. It was like watching someone burn the Mona Lisa to keep warm for 5 minutes. "They'll sell quickly," I said in a shaky voice. "At that price, a buyer will appear within days, maybe hours." Vulture investors love this type of announcement. "They already have a buyer," said Arthur, expanding on an email exchange that he intercepted from the real estate agency's server. "The deed is being prepared for Friday, 48 hours from now. Eleanor, if they sell this house and the money is transferred to an account in the Cayman Islands or turned into cryptocurrencies, we will never see a penny again." Judicial recovery would take decades. I needed more than numbers. Numbers prove movement, but do not prove fraud. A good defense lawyer might say that Lucas was just managing the estate incompetently. I needed to prove intent. I needed to prove that they knew they were committing a crime. I needed their voice confessing. It was then that I remembered the home automation system. When I installed the security cameras and surround sound system 6 months ago, the technician convinced me to put an audio monitor in the library and living room so I could give voice commands for lights and music. The system was connected to the house's Wi-Fi. Lucas and Camilla changed the lock and bank passwords, but did they remember to reset the smart home server? "Arthur, lend me your tablet," I asked urgently. I entered the IP address of the home server. The login screen appeared. I tried the old password. Access denied. My heart sank. Of course they have changed. But then I tried the factory default password for the router in the basement that Lucas probably didn't even know existed. Admin. Password 1234. The screen flashed green. Access granted. I was in. I had no access to the cameras as they had been physically disconnected, and the screen showed no signal. But the audio, the environmental microphone system was still active, indicating it was picking up sound. A microphone icon pulsed on the screen. "Turn up the volume," whispered Arthur, leaning closer to the tablet as if it were a sacred oracle. The sound of static filled Arthur's room, followed by the unmistakable sound of cutlery hitting plates. They were having dinner. On my desk, I heard the sound of liquid being poured into a cup. I'm telling you, Lucas. Camilla's voice sounded crystal clear and shrill, cutting through the silence of our war room. The broker said that the Russian investor wants to close the deal on Friday. Money in hand, 3 million clean. But it's very cheap, Camilla. Lucas's voice sounded tearful and drunk. Mom would kill us if she knew we sold the house for that price. She loved that house. She's dead, Lucas, Camilla shouted, and I could hear the sound of her hand hitting the table. Dead and buried, or better yet, cremated on paper. Stop being a slacker. We need this money before someone at the bank starts asking questions about the lack of judicial inventory. Dr. Silas said that the certificate holds the line for a week, but after that, the system cross-checks data. We have to disappear with the money and go to Europe. There was a pause. I held my breath. Arthur pressed the record button on the screen, capturing every sound wave of that damned confession. What if she shows up? Lucas asked in a terrified whisper. What if she goes to the police? I dreamed about her yesterday. I dreamed that she was in the window looking at me. Stop being an idiot, Camilla laughed, a cruel metallic laugh. Who will believe her? She is an undocumented 72-year-old woman. If she appears, we say she is a senile imposter. The paper says she died, Lucas. The paper is the truth, and with 3 million in the account, we can hire the best lawyers to admit her to an asylum as a destitute crazy person if she dares to show up. Now drink your wine. It's a $5,000 Petrus. Enjoy the inheritance your mother never had the courage to give you. I closed my eyes, feeling a hot tear run down my face. It wasn't sadness. It was the final confirmation. They didn't just kill me. They planned to admit me. They planned to erase me from reality using the money I sweated to earn. Camilla's coldness, calculation, contempt, everything was recorded in that 3-minute and 14-second audio file. Arthur stopped recording. Silence returned to the library, but now it was a silence charged with static electricity. He looked at me, and his face no longer had the ironic smile. He was deadly serious. We have proof, he said calmly. This is conspiracy, fraud, misrepresentation, and abuse of the disabled. That's Chain Eleanor, long jail and no bail. But it's not enough to arrest me, I said, opening my eyes and staring at the reflection of my own fury on the tablet screen. If the police get there now, they can claim that the audio was manipulated or take out bail with the money they already stole. And the sale of the house, the buyer could claim good faith, and I would spend years fighting in court to recover the property. I need to prevent the subscription. I need them to sign their own sentence in front of witnesses. Arthur nodded, understanding what I was getting at. The sale is Friday. In the buyer's law office, Arthur continued to reason out loud. They think they are selling to an anonymous Russian investor. What if the Russian investor has a local representative? I suggested feeling the plan form in my mind like a perfect spider web. What if that representative requires all parties to be present to transfer the funds? Arthur smiled, and that smile was the most dangerous thing I had ever seen. He picked up the phone. I still have that shell holding company in Panama that I used for the Steel Corp merger in 2005. Vostok Investments. I can forge a power of attorney in an hour. I will be the buyer's representative. I'm going to schedule the meeting at my old office downtown that I still keep out of pure sentimentality. I'll tell them the money is on the table, but they need it Sam sign in person. And me? I asked. You said, Arthur, looking at me with a glow of admiration. You will be the ultimate surprise. You will enter that room at the exact moment the pen touches the paper. We're going to film everything. We'll have the police waiting in the next room. But before the police come in, I want them to see you. I want them to feel the terror of seeing a dead body walk. I looked at the clock. 4 a.m. There were 30 hours left before the meeting. 30 hours to set the stage. 30 hours to transform me from beggar to avenging queen. I need clothes, Arthur, I said, getting up from the chair. I can't show up there looking like a victim. I need to walk into that room looking like I own the world. I need a new Chanel suit, done hair, and wore makeup. If I'm going to come back from the dead, I'm going to come back flawless. Arthur laughed and opened a drawer, taking out a black titanium credit card. Spend what you need. The limit is infinite. Let's make these two bastards wish they had never been born. I took the card, feeling the cold weight of the metal in my hand. The feeling of financial power returning to my fingers was intoxicating. I had the proof. I had the exact numbers. I had the recording of the confession. And now I had the funding for the trap. The hunt was over. The slaughter was about to begin. They think they're selling a house to a stranger, but they're about to sell their souls to the devil. And the devil wears Prada and is very angry. If you want to see their faces when the dead woman walks through the door and turns their millionaire's dream into a prison nightmare, you can't miss the next chapter. Sign up now and ring the bell because the trap is set and the bait is set. Comment below. What would be the first thing you would say to your cheater right now? My phrase has already been chosen, and it will be devastating. The weight of the black titanium credit card in my hand was as comforting as the butt of a loaded gun. It was exactly 9 o'clock on Friday morning, and I was standing in front of the window of Maison Saint-Honoré, the most exclusive boutique in the city, where a simple silk scarf cost the equivalent of a common worker's 3-month salary. I entered the store not like the beggar who slept on the park bench, but like an exiled queen returning to reclaim her throne. The saleswoman, an impeccable young woman who looked at me with disdain when I stepped onto the Persian rug, changed her expression instantly when I placed the black unlimited card on the glass counter. The smell of that store was the smell of my world leather new French perfume and the respectful silence that only excessive money can buy. I need armor, I said, looking fixedly at the girl. Not a party dress. I want a suit, deep navy blue, Italian cut, something that says I own the building and not just a tenant, and I need it now. Set at 2 hours. I spent $4,200 that morning. The cold wool structured blazer cost $2,500. The pearl silk blouse cost $800. The comfortable but lethal mid-heeled shoes cost $900. When I looked in the dressing room mirror, I no longer saw the defeated and dirty old lady. I saw Eleanor Vance as the woman who built an empire from nothing. The impeccable cut of the suit hid my thinness caused by the hunger of the last few days and gave my shoulders a width and grandeur that I would need for what was to come. I applied blood-red lipstick to my lips, the only bright color on my pale face. It was war paint. While I was transforming, Arthur was executing the second part of the plan, with the surgical precision of someone who has destroyed entire corporations before lunch. He reactivated his old office on the 42nd floor of a skyscraper in the financial district. The place had been closed for 5 years, but Arthur kept the $15,000 monthly rent paid strictly on time, just for nostalgia and power. When I got there at 3 o'clock, the smell of wood wax and old books enveloped me. The view from the panoramic window showed the entire city at our feet, tiny and insignificant. It was from up there that predators watched their prey. Arthur was sitting at the head of a solid mahogany conference table that was 20 feet long. On the table, there was only one object, a brown envelope. Inside was the bait, a certified cashier's check from an offshore bank in the exact amount of $3,200,000. It was Arthur's real money. He said realism was essential to selling the lie. Lucas and Camilla needed to see the money, smell the paper money, believe that they were seconds away from becoming millionaires. They confirmed it, Arthur said, without looking up from a document he was reviewing. They're in the elevator. Their real estate agent Awel Igu warning that they are going up. Greed made them arrive 15 minutes early. They are desperate, Eleanor. I felt butterflies in the pit of my stomach, but my hands didn't shake. I was beyond scared. I was in cold justice territory. Where am I? I asked, smoothing the lapel of my new blazer. Arthur pointed to a heavy oak door at the side of the room, the observation room. The glass is mirrored. You will see and hear everything. The sound system will transmit the conversation directly to that room. Detective Miller and her team are already positioned in the service hallway, ready to enter at my signal, but the signal will only be given after signing. We need them to complete the crime. We need them to sign the transfer of the deed based on the fraud of your death. The moment the pen leaves the paper, the crime of major embezzlement will be complete. I entered the adjacent room. It was a small, dark space where only the shine of the mirrored glass illuminated the room. On the other side, the conference room looked like a lit stage. I felt like a theater director about to watch the final act of a Greek tragedy. At 13:45 minutes, the double doors to the conference room opened, and there they were. Lucas entered first. He wore a gray suit that seemed a little tight around the waist, and his face was sweaty and red. He looked around nervously like a cornered animal, but it was Camilla who stole the show. She walked in like she owned the place. She wore a tight black dress too short for a business meeting and sunglasses that she removed with a theatrical gesture. She was holding a designer bag, my designer bag, the one that disappeared from my closet 2 months ago and that I thought I had lost. Her audacity in using my belongings to sell my house made my blood boil. The real estate agent, a short, agitated man, made introductions. Mr. Penhaligon, these are Lucas and Camilla Vance, the sellers. sole heirs of the property on Avenida das Acacias. Arthur didn't get up. He remained seated like an emperor on his throne, looking at them over the top of his reading glasses. He exuded an aura of superiority so thick that Lucas instinctively shrugged his shoulders. "Sit down," Arthur said in a voice that brooked no refusal. "Let's be brief. My client Vostok Investments values efficiency. The money is here. Is the house empty?" "Yes," Camilla replied quickly, sitting down and crossing her legs. "Totally empty. We have already removed the deceased's personal belongings. It was very painful, you know, touching her things so soon, but we wanted to close that cycle." I clenched my fists in the dark room. "Painful? They threw my clothes in trash bags or sold them at thrift stores." "I understand," said Arthur with a neutral tone of voice. "And the documentation? Does the death certificate open the extrajudicial inventory?" Lucas placed a folder on the table. His hands were visibly shaking. "It's all here, sir. The death was sudden, cardiac arrest. My mother was already old, you know. It was a blessing in a way. She didn't suffer. A blessing. My own son was telling a stranger that my imaginary death was a blessing. I felt a lone tear fall, but I wiped it away immediately. There was no room for sadness now." Arthur opened the folder and examined the fake death certificate with torturous slowness. The silence in the room was broken only by the sound of paper being turned over and Lucas's labored breathing. "Doctor," Silas murmured, Arthur reading the doctor's name. "Curious. I don't know this cardiologist. Does he work at the Central Hospital?" Camilla intervened, her voice sharp as a razor. "He was a private doctor, provided home care. My mother-in-law didn't like hospitals. But does it matter? The document has the notary's seal. It's official. Did we come here to sell a house or to discuss medicine?" Arthur smiled a thin, dangerous smile. "We came to do business, Mrs. Vance, and business requires clarity. My client is paying $3,200,000 in cash. This is a significant discount on the market value, but considering your rush to liquidate the asset, we believe it is a fair price." "It's very fair," said Lucas, his eyes fixed on the manila envelope on the table. "We just want to resolve this and move on, dealing with grief." Arthur took the envelope and removed the check. He slid it across the mahogany table until it stopped exactly in the center, out of reach of Lucas's greedy hands, but visible enough to mesmerize them. $3,200,000. Targeted, immediate compensation. It can be deposited into any global account today. I saw Camilla's eyes light up. It was an almost sexual glow, a pure lust for paper money. She licked her lips. Lucas looked like he was going to pass out with relief. They were already spending that money in their minds. They were already in Paris on yachts in L Diamond Eyes. "All I need," said Arthur, pushing the sales contract and a gold fountain pen towards them, "is the signatures, here and here, declaring under penalty of perjury that they are the legitimate owners and that there are no legal impediments to the sale." Camilla grabbed the pen, almost ripping it off the table. "Where do I sign?" she asked. "Here," said Arthur, pointing. "And Lucas here." I watched through the glass. The tip of the pen touched the paper. Camilla signed with a quick, aggressive flourish. She passed the pen to Lucas. He hesitated for a split second. Maybe a remnant of consciousness? No, it was just fear. He signed. "It's done," Camilla said, putting down the pen and extending her hand to take the check. "Where is our money?" Arthur placed his hand on the check, immobilizing it. "Just one more thing," he said. "My client has a very strict compliance clause. It requires me to verify the identity of all living parties involved in the transaction. And interestingly enough, the building's security system just alerted me that there is a third interested party who has arrived for the meeting." "What?" Lucas asked, turning pale. "There is no third party. It's just me and Camilla. My mother is dead." Arthur looked directly at the mirror where I was hiding. He gave a subtle nod. "Are you sure, Mr. Vance? Because the person behind that door seems to vehemently disagree with your death certificate." Lucas and Camilla slowly turned around, looking at the oak door of the room where I was. The silence was absolute. The air conditioning seemed to have stopped. I put my hand on the doorknob. My hand was steady. My heart was beating hard, but it was the beat of a war drum. I turned the handle. The door opened with a soft creak. I took a step into the bright room. The heel of my shoe hit the wooden floor with a sound that echoed like a gunshot. "Hello, Lucas," I said in a calm, icy voice. "Hello, Camilla." The reaction was visceral. Lucas let out a strangled scream and fell back into the chair, knocking it over. He seemed to have seen the devil himself. His face turned white as paper. Camilla froze. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked at the check, then at me, then at the death certificate on the table, trying to process the impossibility of what her eyes were seeing. "Mother?" Lucas whispered on the floor, crawling away from me like I was contagious. "But I saw the paper. You're dead." I walked over to the table, picked up the fake death certificate, and slowly tore it into two pieces, the sound of the paper ripping being the loudest thing in the room. "Apparently, Lucas, I'm very hard to kill," I said, throwing the torn pieces at him like confetti at a funeral. "You forgot to check your pulse before spending your inheritance." Arthur stood up, collecting the check for $3 million. "I think the deal is canceled due to force majeure," said Arthur ironically. "The owner appears to be inconveniently alive." "This is a trick," shouted Camilla, standing up and suddenly recovering her fury. "It's a look-alike. She's an actress. Eleanor is dead. We have the document. Lucas, do something." Camilla advanced towards me with her nails showing, her eyes full of insane hatred. She was going to attack me. She was willing to kill me for real right then and there to keep up the lie. But before she could take 2 steps, the side doors slammed open. "Police! Nobody moves!" shouted Detective Miller, entering with gun drawn, followed by 3 uniformed officers. Camilla stopped halfway, her face contorted into a mask of horror. Lucas began to cry, sobbing on the floor in the fetal position. "Lucas Vance and Camilla Vance, you are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, falsification of public documents, and attempted qualified homicide," continued the detective as the officers moved forward to handcuff you. I stood in the eye of the storm, untouchable in my navy blue suit, looking at the pathetic creatures I once called family being dragged away from the check they so coveted. The sound of the cuffs clicking on Camilla's wrists was the sweetest music I've ever heard. But the battle was not over. As Lucas was lifted up by the police officers, he looked at me with the eyes of a puppy dog. "Mom, please." It was her idea. I didn't want to. She forced me. "Mom, help me." I looked at my son, the boy I carried in my lap, the man who declared me dead. And at that moment, I had to make the most difficult decision of my life. If you want to know if a mother's heart speaks louder than justice, or if I'm going to let my own son rot in the jail he built for himself, you can't miss the outcome of this story. The final judgment is coming, and the sentence will shake the structures of our family forever. Sign up now and comment below. You forgive. What would your son do if he cried and asked for forgiveness after trying to steal everything you have? My answer will surprise you. The metallic sound of the handcuffs closing around my son's wrists was the loudest, most devastating noise I have ever heard in my entire existence, surpassing even the rumble of thunder in summer storms or the sound of shattering glass. That dry, definitive click echoed through the hardwood walls of Arthur's office, reverberating inside my ribcage and shattering what little was left of my maternal heart. I was standing less than 2 meters away, observing the scene with a surreal clarity, as if time had slowed down to force me to witness every micro detail of my personal tragedy. The smell in the room changed drastically. The scent of old leather and wood wax was suddenly supplanted by the acrid, sour smell of human fear, the kind of odor that wafts from the pores when the body goes into nervous breakdown. Lucas was on his knees on the $30,000 Persian rug, curled up in the fetal position, crying like a child who had just broken a cheap vase. But he hadn't broken a vase. He had broken the law, morality, and the sacred bond that bound us together. "Mom, please don't let them take me," he sobbed, his face pressed against the floor, tears and mucus staining the expensive fabric of the carpet. I didn't know what I was doing. Camilla said it was just bureaucracy. She said you would understand. "Mom, I am your son, his only son. You can't send me to jail with these animals." I looked down at the top of his head, where his hair was beginning to thin. That was the boy I taught to walk, the boy I took to his first piano lesson, the boy I built a $4.5 million empire for, so he never had to feel the pain of need. And now that same boy was there, begging for mercy, after trying to sell my house and erase me from history. The pain I felt was not anger. It was a deep exhaustion, a fatigue of the soul that weighed tons. "Raise your head, Lucas," I said, my voice trembling but as cold as surgical steel. "Have the dignity to look at the woman you murdered on paper. Don't blame your wife. You signed that document. You went to the registry office. You looked the employee in the eye and said I was dead. You are not a victim here. You are a cowardly accomplice." While Lucas burst into pathetic tears, Camilla's reaction was the polar opposite and much more terrifying. She didn't cry. As Detective Miller tightened the handcuffs on her slender wrists, Camilla held her head high with venomous arrogance. Her face was red with fury, not embarrassment. His hate-shot eyes were fixed on me like two lasers burning my skin. She looked like a cornered beast that was still trying to bite, even with the trap closed around her neck. The short black dress she had worn to my money's funeral now looked vulgar and out of place under the fluorescent lights of police reality. "That's ridiculous," Camilla hissed, spitting the words in the officer's direction. "Do you know who I am? Do you know who you are dealing with? My family has lawyers who cost more than the annual salary of all of you combined. Let me go now, and maybe I won't sue the department for abuse of authority and kidnapping. And as for you, damn old woman," she turned her face towards me, her teeth bared in a grotesque smile. "You may have won today, but you will die alone. Nobody loves you, Eleanor. We only put up with your mothball smell for the money. You should have really died. It would have been a favor to the world. Those words should hurt me. At another time, they would have been like stab wounds. But there in that office with the check for $3,200,000 still resting on the mahogany desk, like a monument to greed, those words only confirmed what I already knew. There was no love. There never was. There was just a prolonged business transaction disguised as a family one. "Get us out of here," Arthur ordered in the deep voice of someone used to commanding corporate armies. "The smell of this scum is permeating my books." The police lifted Lucas by force. He screamed my name, stretching his handcuffed hands towards me in a theatrical plea that made me feel nauseous. I didn't move. I didn't reach out. I remained motionless as a pillar of salt, watching my son being dragged out of the room into the hallway and finally into the elevator that would take him to the basement of the society. When the elevator doors closed, cutting off his screams, a heavy and absolute silence fell over the room. I turned to the table. The torn death certificate was still there, the pieces of white paper scattered like funeral confetti. Next to him, the check, $3,200,000, a piece of paper that was worth more than my life to the two people who just left. I took the check with shaking hands. The roll was cold and impersonal. How many families have been destroyed because of pieces of paper like this? How many mothers were betrayed by children who didn't want to wait for nature to take its course? Arthur approached me and placed his hand lightly on my shoulder. His touch was warm and human, contrasting with the coldness of the moment. "It's over, Eleanor," he said softly. "Police have the audio recording of the house. They have the signatures on the fraudulent sales contract. They have the flagrant. There will be no bail. Judge Miller has already issued an order to block their passports if they try to escape. They will spend the next 15 years in 6-square-meter cells wearing orange uniforms and eating processed food. Justice has been served." I looked at Arthur and felt a hot tear run down my face, ruining the perfect makeup I had done hours before. "Justice has been served, Arthur," I replied with a choked voice. "But at what price? I got my money back. I got my house back. But I lost my son. Today I buried my son for real. That man who left here in handcuffs, he died to me. I'm a childless widow now. The loneliness I feel is greater than any bank balance can fill." "You're not alone," Arthur said, taking the silk scarf out of his pocket and handing it to me. "You got rid of parasites, Eleanor. It hurts like ripping off a gangrenous limb, but it was necessary for you to survive. If they had gotten the money, do you think they would have stopped? The next step would be asylum, or a pillow over your face while you slept. They crossed the line of humanity. You survived. That's a victory." I took a deep breath, wiping my face and recomposing my posture. Arthur was right. I couldn't afford self-pity. I still had battles to fight. Their arrest was just the beginning of the media and legal circus that would follow. "We need to go to the police station," I said, smoothing out my navy blue suit. "I need to give the official statement. I need to sign the criminal complaint. I need to look at the police chief and say in clear words, 'I accuse my son.'" We went down to the ground floor. When the building's doors opened onto the street, we were greeted by a blinding flash of lights. The press was there. Someone at the law firm or the police must have leaked the story. "Dead woman resurrects and orders her millionaire son to be arrested," was an irresistible headline for the sensationalist newspapers. Microphones were shoved in my face. Reporters shouted questions, running over each other. "Mrs. Vance, is it true that your son faked his death? How do you feel about sending your only son to prison? Will you forgive them? How much money was involved?" The flashes went off like strobe explosions, making me dizzy. I saw my reflection in the lens of a TV camera. I looked powerfully untouchable in my expensive suit and sunglasses. The world was watching the Iron Lady. They didn't see their mother broken inside. Arthur made his way through the crowd, using his body and his cane as a shield, guiding me to the armored car that was waiting for us. "Come in," he said, closing the heavy door and shutting out the noise of the crowd. In the silence of the car as we drove to the central police station, I began to process the magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't just a family crime, it was a public scandal. My private life, my financial sacrifices, my pain would all be consumed by the public as entertainment. But there was a positive side. Lucas and Camilla's public humiliation would be total. They wanted status. They wanted to be the elite. Now they would be known worldwide as the ungrateful monsters who tried to kill their own mother out of greed. Social shame would be their real-life sentence. We arrived at the police station. The atmosphere was austere, gray, and depressing. I was taken to a private interrogation room, not as a suspect, but as the main victim. The deputy, a gray-haired man with a tired look, placed a stack of documents in front of me. Mrs. Vance said, "We need you to confirm the details, the value of fraud, the assets involved, and the intention to sue. If you drop the charges now, being family, the prosecutor can lighten the sentence." I looked at the pen on the table. Withdraw the complaint? Forgive? The image of Camilla laughing with my Petrus wine in her hand came to my mind. Lucas's voice saying that my death was a blessing echoed in my ears. They had no mercy on me when I was sleeping on the street hungry. They showed no mercy when they deleted me from the system. Pity is a luxury they cannot afford. I took the pen. The metal was cold. My hand didn't shake. "I want the maximum sentence," I said, signing my name with force. Tearing lightly pressed the paper. "I want them sued for every penny. I want moral damages. I want property damage. I want them to return the money they spent on the car. I want them to return the clothes they stole. And I want them to stay locked up until the day their hair is as white as mine. There is no delegated agreement. They bet my life and lost. Now I'm collecting the debt." When leaving the room, I passed through the corridor of temporary detention cells. Through the small reinforced glass window of one of the metal doors, I saw Camilla. She was sitting on the concrete bench barefoot, her black dress torn at the hem, her makeup running down her face like a melted mask. She saw me. For a second, the arrogance disappeared, and I saw only the pure terror of someone who realizes the future is over. She opened her mouth to say something, maybe a curse, maybe a request, but I didn't stop. I continued walking. The sound of my heels hitting the linoleum floor was the sound of my victory. I left the police station like a reborn woman. The night air was cold, but I felt warm inside, the heat of justice. I had lost my family, but I had regained my dignity. I had 4.5 million reasons to keep living and 0 reasons to look back. But there was still one thing missing: the money they spent, the car, the jewelry, asset recovery. The emotional revenge was complete, but the financial revenge, oh, that still had one last glorious chapter to be written. The trial is over, but the final accounting is yet to come. If you think seeing the villains in jail was satisfying, wait until you see how much I'm going to profit from their stupidity and how I'm going to use the money they tried to steal to build something that will immortalize my name and erase theirs from history. Sign up now for the grand finale of this saga. Comment below. What would be the first thing you would buy with the money recovered from the person who tried to rob you? My choice will shock everyone. The sound of ocean waves gently crashing against the rocks, 30 stories below my balcony, is the only music my ears want to hear this Tuesday morning. The sun shines with golden intensity, reflecting off the Atlantic Ocean, as if the water were made of liquid diamonds melted just for my viewing pleasure. I'm sitting on a teak chaise longue with pure white linen upholstery on the 600-square-foot penthouse I bought 3 months ago in one of the world's most exclusive coastal cities. The air here smells of sea salt, expensive sunscreen, and absolute freedom. The warm breeze plays with the hem of my turquoise silk robe, the same shade as the cloudless sky above me. Next to me, on a tempered glass table, rests a bottle of Cru Grande Cuvée champagne from 2008, sweating cold drops of condensation in the tropical heat. It's 11:14 in the morning, and I have absolutely nothing to do other than exist and spend the fortune that my son tried to steal, and that has now multiplied exponentially. It has been exactly 6 months and 12 days since the door to that meeting room closed, sealing the fate of Lucas and Camilla. The trial was a media spectacle that I watched from the front row, dressed in my best suits and with an indecipherable expression on my face. Human justice can often be flawed, but when you have irrefutable evidence and a lawyer like Arthur Penhaligon at your side, it becomes a machine for crushing villains. The sentence handed down by the judge was music to my tired soul. 15 years of closed prison for both, without the possibility of parole for the first 10 years. The accusations piled up like an avalanche: fraud, embezzlement, misrepresentation, elder abuse, and conspiracy. I remember Camilla's expression when the hammer hit. Her makeup was smudged, and she looked like she had aged 20 years in 20 days. She looked at me expecting to see pity. What she saw was just a reflection of her own poor choices. Lucas didn't even look at me. He silently mourned a broken man who traded a mother's love for a promise of easy money that never came to fruition. But the criminal victory was only the first part of my rebirth. True justice, poetic and visceral justice, came through numbers. Arthur, with his sadistic genius, did not stop at their prison. He initiated a series of civil lawsuits that devastated any remaining assets they might have had. The $120,000 sports car Lucas bought with my stolen money, it was seized and auctioned. The recovered amount returned to my account with interest and monetary correction. Camilla's designer clothes? Confiscated to pay court costs. They entered prison bankrupt, owing up to Seoul for the state and for me. And then came the financial masterstroke, the case against the hospital and the registry office. The grotesque negligence that allowed a corrupt doctor and a greedy son to declare me dead without due verification could not go unpunished. The out-of-court settlement to avoid an even bigger scandal was astronomical. The hospital group paid me compensation of $2,500,000 for moral and existential damages. The registry office added another $800,000 to the amount. I didn't just get back what I had, I almost doubled my net worth. The ultimate irony is that Lucas's greed made me richer than he could ever dream of being. I sold the Victorian mansion. That red brick house I loved so much had become a mausoleum of betrayed memories. I could no longer walk down the halls without remembering Lucas as a child running around, or Camilla's voice echoing in the dining room, planning my hospitalization. I put the property up for sale at the height of the scandal. The notoriety of the Casa de Morta Viva case attracted morbid buyers and eccentric investors. What Arthur predicted happened. There was a bidding war. I sold the property for $5,800,000, a record value for the neighborhood. I handed over the keys to the new owner, a technology mogul, without looking back. I left the furniture, I left the curtains, I left the ghosts. I left there with just my jewelry, clothes, and my dignity restored. Now my bank balance surpasses the $10 million mark. 10 million. It is a number that brings peace of mind that borders on nirvana. But money is not the most important thing. The important thing is what he represents now. Before, I accumulated to leave a legacy. I saved money thinking about Lucas's future. I deprived myself of luxuries to make sure he was safe. What a colossal mistake. What a waste of life. I needed to die bureaucratically to understand that the only legacy that matters is the life we live while the blood runs hot through our veins. Arthur is sitting on the other lounge chair, reading a printed newspaper and smoking one of his forbidden Cuban cigars. He became my traveling companion, my confidant, and my best friend. There is no romance between us, just the mutual respect of two survivors who looked into the abyss and laughed back. He refused the legal fees, saying the fun of destroying Lucas and Camilla was worth more than any check. But I insisted on donating $500,000 to a foundation that helps elderly victims of financial fraud in his name. Eleanor, Arthur said, folding the newspaper and looking at the sea. You know that today is visiting day at the state penitentiary, don't you? I know, I replied, picking up my glass of champagne and watching the bubbles rise in perfect strands of gold. You are going? He asked with a smile on the side of his mouth, knowing the answer. I lifted the glass to my lips, tasting the complex, toasty flavor of the $300 a bottle wine. Arthur, I'm busy, I said, gesturing to the empty horizon and the blue sky. I have a massage scheduled for 2 in the afternoon, and then we're going to have dinner at that 3-star Michelin restaurant that opened in the port. I don't have time to visit people who don't exist. Lucas and Camilla died the day they signed that paper. I am a childless widow enjoying retirement. Arthur let out a raucous laugh and clinked his own glass. To life, he said. I responded to life, and spending every penny of it. I drank the champagne, feeling the alcohol warming my chest in the place where there was pain and anguish before. I think about them sometimes, of course. I think of Lucas alone in his cell, realizing that the inheritance he killed for is being drunk from crystal glasses and spent on first-class travel by the mother he despised. I hope it hurts. I hope that with every news he receives about my new life, he feels the weight of his own stupidity crushing him. The best revenge is not hate. The best revenge is outrageous and unshakable happiness. I look at my hands. The same hands that built an empire, that were handcuffed in a hospital that shivered from the cold on a park bench. Now they are adorned with a 5-carat yellow diamond ring that I bought yesterday simply because I thought it was beautiful and because I can. I am no longer Eleanor, the guardian of the estate. I am Eleanor, the empress of my own destiny. The system tried to erase me. My family tried to bury me. But they forgot that seeds are also buried, and when they receive the right amount of dirt, they grow stronger than ever. I flourished amidst their trash, and now under this glorious sun, I promise myself that I will never again let anyone define my worth or my worth. I'm alive, I'm rich, and I'm free. If you've come this far with me in this game, through pain, betrayal, and absolute redemption, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I hope my story serves as a warning and inspiration. Protect what's yours. Do not blindly trust even your blood when money is involved. And above all, never stop living today to guarantee tomorrow for those who don't deserve you. Life is a breath, and I almost lost mine because of a role. Don't make the same mistake. Live now. Spend the expensive perfume. Open the saved wine. Love those who love you and eliminate those who use you from your life. Subscribe to the channel for more real and visceral stories like this. Share this video with someone who needs to open their eyes about inheritance and family. And leave a like if you agree that justice was delayed but did not fail, and that champagne tastes much better when bought with the money they tried to steal from you. Until the next story, stay alive and stay smart.